Minister John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, I should start by agreeing with the comments which a number of colleagues on both sides of the House have made, that this was originally a very simple three-clause bill to change just two dates. It's a comment which has been made by many people, and it is now, we see, garlanded with baubles. It's a Christmas tree with tinsel, twinkling lights, and a honking great star on top to boot. That said, the Government is willing to accept most of the Lord's amendments requiring reports to be laid before Parliament on progress towards a whole host of important issues such as transparency of political donations and loans, gambling, suicide prevention and much else. I don't propose to go through in huge detail all the various amendments which are therefore being accepted, other than to respond to the specific question which was asked by Right Honourable Gentleman, Leader of the DUP from Belfast North, who asked about whether or not we will end up with some sort of a gap in the legal coverage around the abortion amendments, which is an issue of conscience, as we all know. I just want to reassure him that he is right to say that there are a number of other statutes which will persist, notably the 1945 Northern Ireland Act, which he mentioned, and also that the Government will firstly try and make sure that we bring forward the new regime as fast as possible in order to minimise any gaps that might occur, to create a seamless transition, and also to issue guidelines and advice to medical professionals, amongst others, in order to minimise any of those problems. We also look forward to working and discussing that with both him and other people in Northern Ireland in depth, as necessary, in order to ensure that we come up with a safe transition from today to the intended outcome. Mr. Speaker, on the specifics of the amendment that is in front of us today in this particular session, I have two narrow criticisms, important criticisms, but narrow constitutional ones, and a broader comment to make. If I can start with the narrow ones. I appreciate that constitutional niceties and procedures aren't everybody's cup of tea, but it is worth pointing out that parts of this amendment have already been defeated here in the Commons, and the rest was ruled out of scope before it even got here. And yet, here we are, being asked to include it because the unelected Lords decided we should. I would urge colleagues on all sides to send a respectful but firm message that we appreciate their views and will have nothing further to do with it on this occasion. Now, alone amongst the... I've got very little time. I'll take one amendment and then I will have to make progress.
Very briefly, may I just remind the Minister that this amendment is being moved or is being proposed by those who voted to remain. And speaking as someone who voted to leave and is in a minority in this place, I can assure the Minister that we on our side of the referendum debate would in no way countenance a prorogation of Parliament. So in many respects, these people are tilting at windmills.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will come on to a broader comment about the background politics of this in a second if I can, but my honourable friend has made his point. I will also point out that alone amongst the various amendments which the Lord has sent us and which has now been amended here, this one has little to do with Northern Ireland and everything to do with Brexit. All the other amendments deal with important issues which are specific to Northern Ireland. Same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland, abortion in Northern Ireland, suicide prevention in Northern Ireland. But not this one. I'm sorry, I don't have time. But not this one. It attempts to bind the UK Parliament for a UK-wide issue. Not only does this breach a pretty important precedent that we try, at least, to work on a cross-community consensual basis when it comes to Northern Ireland, because the sensitivities and the risks are so great, so significant, that it would be irresponsible and dangerous to play political games in such a charged arena. But also, in this case, this bill stands a decent chance of never becoming law if the Stormont Assembly restarts before royal assent. And I'm delighted, Mr. Speaker, to report that the talks are ongoing. They were ongoing yesterday. I believe they are continuing today, and I'm sure that everybody here wishes them every success. But if the Stormont Assembly restarts before royal assent, not only is this amendment dangerously partisan, weaponising a Northern Ireland bill for Brexit in a way which we usually rightly try to avoid, but it could easily put us through all of that grief for no good reason at all if it fails to become law. So this change will set a constitutional precedent. that could last for centuries whether we intend it to or not. We should not do it like this, not in this bill, and not in this way. Now, Mr. Speaker, can I come to the broader point about this idea as well? This is less of a direct opposition to the specifics of this amendment, but a broader point about the politics behind it, which I think should inform all of us in our decision about how we vote in a minute. I am sure that we are all Democrats here, first, last and always. So even though I and many others originally voted Remain in the EU referendum 3 years ago, I have since become, I hope, and many others have become, strong and doughty backers of the democratic decision to leave. Now, many of us would far prefer to leave with a sensible deal. But if that isn't possible and it comes down to a choice between no deal and no Brexit, then reluctantly but firmly, I choose no deal. I'm sorry, I really don't have time. I'm down to my last 90 seconds. I know many colleagues on all sides of the House, including a couple of signatories on this amendment, now feel the same way. We have been going at this for 3 years, Mr. Speaker. The country sent us all a very clear message at the polls in May that they want this done. We have reached a narrowing funnel where our choices are getting fewer and fewer. We are running out of road. The time and voters' tolerance for us failing to address that central issue is running out. So the problem with this amendment for many of us isn't about more or less democracy. It is pretending to be democratic, but in reality it is trying to prevent the democratic referendum decision from ever happening at all. So I have a challenge. I have a challenge for the backers of this amendment, which would be hugely reassuring to moderate former Remainer Brexiteers like myself. If it finally comes down this autumn to the stark and simple choice between no deal and no Brexit, which will you choose? Will you promise to honour the democratic decision, or will you not? If you can't make that commitment, if you can't make that pledge, then I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, voters will conclude that this is a stitch-up, a clever piece of procedure that pretends to care about democracy.
Order! The House must come to order. Minister Penrose.
To care about democracy, but in reality is trying to prevent a decision that has already been taken from ever happening at all. It's a heavily
Order! Under the business of the House order of the 8th of July, I must now bring proceedings on Lord's amendments to a conclusion. The question is that Amendment A to Lord's Amendment 1 be made. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby.